The palace didn't prepare the public. There was no formal warning, just a crisp morning statement naming Catherine as the new royal head of a powerful initiative once expected to belong to Camilla. And within the hour, insiders reported Camilla's fury reverberating through palace walls. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What should have been a routine royal announcement detonated like a bomb within palace corridors. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, had been appointed to a senior role once rumoured to be earmarked for the Queen Consort herself, a position steeped in tradition, authority, and the subtle shaping of royal legacy. This was not a ceremonial nod. It was a seismic shift in internal hierarchy. The announcement, released without fanfare at dawn, stunned royal reporters and blindsided Camilla, who, according to a well-placed aide, was given no direct forewarning, no chance to prepare, no opportunity to save face. The fury came swiftly. Staffers described Camilla's reaction as uncharacteristically explosive. There were reports of raised voices, of doors slammed so violently they were heard echoing through the East Wing. One longtime palace attendant, accustomed to decades of royal tempers, admitted, "I've never seen her like this, not even during the darkest days." And all this was unfolding as Catherine emerged, calm and resolute, from a private meeting with King Charles, less than 24 hours before the announcement. That meeting, now under intense scrutiny, is said to have shaped the final version of the decision. Senior aides who witnessed Catherine's exit said she carried herself with quiet authority, as if the burden of history had finally found its rightful heir. The senior position bestowed on her, sources confirm, isn't symbolic. It carries influence over future patronage, cultural strategy, and even modern representation across the Commonwealth. It's a role of permanence, not performance. And for Camilla, who believed she had secured her place through decades of endurance and survival, this wasn't just a blow, it was a betrayal. Whispers quickly circulated of a deeper plan, one that went beyond a single role and hinted at a long-game rebalancing of succession influence itself. The monarchy had blinked, and when it opened its eyes again, the landscape had changed. To understand why this appointment has shattered royal equilibrium, we must dive into a power struggle that has been simmering for years, just out of the public eye. Camilla's ascent wasn't sudden. It was calculated, careful, and, for a time, quietly accepted. But behind closed doors, a silent resistance had always existed, and Catherine, with her unwavering public support, was its quiet symbol. For years, Camilla played a long game that few understood, and even fewer dared challenge. Her rise from scorned mistress to queen consort was no accident. It was the product of relentless strategy, unwavering endurance, and a web of trusted courtiers who helped her shape an image palatable enough for the British public. Her influence wasn't loud, but it was wide. Diplomats, historians, even senior aides in Clarence House found themselves slowly aligning with Camilla's version of what the monarchy should become. It was a kingdom being redrawn from the inside, room by room. And for a time, it worked. Charles, torn between devotion to his wife and an unrelenting need to legitimize her place, became her quiet defender. The queen consort was not just tolerated, she was protected. But that shield came at a cost. In the shadows of royal obligation, friction brewed particularly with the younger generation. William, still haunted by memories of his mother's pain, viewed Camilla's rise with silent skepticism. And Catherine, ever poised, began to wield her influence not through confrontation, but through consistency. She became the figure the public turned to during crisis, the voice of reason in moments of national grief, the steady hand when the monarchy wavered. Over the years, Catherine's portfolio of duties evolved with precision. No move was rushed, no title loudly sought, but every engagement, every patronage, every whispered briefing behind palace walls became a calculated counterbalance to Camilla's growing power. And while the queen consort strengthened her grip on ceremonial tradition, Catherine expanded her reach into the realm of future relevance, mental health, children's welfare, global diplomacy. Behind the smiles exchanged in public, a quiet chess match had already begun. Aides noticed it first, meetings scheduled without Camilla's knowledge. Strategy sessions where Catherine's opinion carried more weight than expected. Events once under Camilla's remit, suddenly reassigned, rebranded, redirected. And though no explosive confrontations ever made it to the press, insiders described an unmistakable air of tension, icy nods, clipped phrases, and agendas that subtly undermined each other. Charles, in his effort to unify both camps, found himself increasingly cornered, forced to make choices that satisfied neither side fully. And as the years passed, one truth became clear. The crown could not serve two queens of influence. But one moment changed everything, a decision behind palace gates that made the rivalry impossible to ignore. It happened behind tightly closed doors, with no press, no public schedule, and no leaks until now. A meeting between King Charles, William, and Catherine, one that would quietly tip the future of the monarchy. The silence surrounding that room was intentional. No staff circulated nearby, no diaries noted its occurrence. For hours, the monarch, his heir, and the Princess of Wales were unreachable, engaged in a discussion that, by all accounts, would shift the tectonic plates of royal power. Sources close to the inner circle described the atmosphere as tense but purposeful. There were no frills, no formalities, just three individuals grappling with the question no one dared ask aloud in public. What future is this monarchy building, and who is truly fit to carry it forward? Camilla, notably, was not invited, not informed, and most critically, not consulted. When she learned of the meeting hours later, her fury wasn't just about exclusion. It was about what the meeting symbolized, a direct challenge to her influence, and a signal that decisions were now being made without her voice in the room. Insiders claim the agenda revolved around legacy, not just Charles's, but the long-term architecture of the crown itself. William, increasingly seen as the future's anchor, is said to have made his stance unmistakably clear. It was time to prepare the monarchy for the world ahead, not the world left behind. And Catherine? Her role was no longer passive. She spoke not just as a royal spouse, but as a leader with a vision rooted in modernity, compassion, and stability. Charles, torn as ever between the emotional loyalty he owed Camilla and the strategic necessity of ensuring survival for the institution, found himself at a historic crossroads. His hesitation was human but brief. Faced with the unified clarity of his son and daughter-in-law, the monarch made a quiet but profound decision. Catherine's new position would not be symbolic. It would be powerful, it would be visible, and it would be permanent. There would be no press release that day, no public announcement, just the quiet drafting of a new order that would later be unveiled to the world. But for those within palace walls, the meaning was clear. A chapter had closed, and a new one had begun with different authors holding the pen. As the ink dried on the new order, the news was delivered, and within hours, Camilla's wrath became impossible to contain. Witnesses described it as unlike anything we've seen from her. Camilla stormed out of a briefing, reportedly shouting, "She's not ready for this, and she knows it." The Queen Consort's fury had finally broken through her composed facade. In that moment, centuries of royal stoicism seemed to fracture as Camilla's anger thundered down the palace corridors. Gone was the careful tactician who had climbed the ranks with restraint and calculation. What remained was a woman cornered by the swift rise of another, and the palace staff, frozen in shock, bore silent witness. One aide, speaking under the cloak of anonymity, confessed the scene left many trembling. Doors were slammed with such force they rattled portraits off the walls, shouting pierced through the stone silence. And in the center of it all stood Camilla, outraged, betrayed, and unfiltered. For years, she had built her presence brick by brick, gaining proximity, power, and a place at the highest table. And now, in a single move, she felt that foundation crumble beneath her. While Catherine's promotion had been planned with subtlety, Camilla's reaction was anything but. The Queen Consort reportedly declared that she would pull out of scheduled engagements until a formal review of the decision was made. Some aides tried to calm her. Others stood frozen, unwilling to be seen choosing sides. Charles, meanwhile, remained quiet, a silence that spoke volumes. His neutrality, in Camilla's eyes, was betrayal in disguise. The fury that unfolded behind closed doors quickly spilled into palace strategy sessions, where her tone grew sharp and accusatory. "She doesn't have the experience," Camilla is believed to have snapped, "and now we'll all have to clean up the consequences." But it wasn't just the internal storm that unsettled the monarchy. As leaks filtered out to carefully placed press contacts, headlines began to swirl, raising uncomfortable questions. Articles cited sources who spoke of Camilla's disrespect for the chain of trust, and others who hinted at resentment cloaked in seniority. As public speculation snowballed, a chilling truth settled over the palace. Camilla was no longer seen as the unshakable consort. She was now a woman fighting against time, against perception, and most tragically, against the very family she had worked so hard to stand beside. And with every outburst, every whisper leaked to the media, the contrast between her unraveling and Catherine's composed ascent became painfully stark. For the first time, some within the institution began to ask, albeit quietly, whether the Queen Consort was losing her grip on both her role and her reputation. But Camilla's rage wouldn't stay private for long, and the media firestorm only intensified the pressure on the palace. The headlines weren't kind. Camilla was painted as bitter, threatened, and power-hungry, while Catherine was hailed as the people's princess too. Overnight, a royal appointment had become a national debate. The divide was sudden, sharp, and unforgiving. While royal announcements are typically met with polite applause or ceremonial nods, this one detonated like a bomb. Tabloids exploded with polarizing covers. One morning edition read, "Catherine rises, Camilla rattled." Another simply called it the shift. Across every screen and social feed, the narrative was already written. Catherine was ascending, and Camilla was falling apart. The media, ever hungry for a dramatic arc, found their perfect contrast. On one side, Catherine, poised and smiling softly through appearances, carrying herself with effortless diplomacy. On the other, Camilla, red-faced behind closed doors, fuming over what many now called a generational handover, and the public chose their side with thunderous clarity. Polls showed a surge in Catherine's favourability, particularly among younger generations, who saw her as modern, relatable, and emotionally grounded. They weren't just supporting her, they were defending her. Hashtags like #Future Queen Catherine and #Royal Grace began trending within hours. But as praise flooded in for the Princess of Wales, shadows also began creeping back into Camilla's narrative. Comparisons to Diana, once tiptoed around, were suddenly everywhere. Commentators highlighted the irony of Camilla's current struggles, the woman once blamed for Diana's heartbreak now facing her own reckoning at the hands of Diana's daughter-in-law. And this time, it wasn't whispers, it was front page. Memes circulated, painting Catherine as an angelic reformer and Camilla as a relic of the past. Edited videos of Diana's old interviews were spliced with clips of Catherine's public engagements, reinforcing the idea that history wasn't just repeating, it was correcting itself. Yet, not everyone was ready to abandon the Queen Consort. Older royalists, especially those who had defended Charles and Camilla's union over the years, voiced concern. They questioned whether Catherine's rise was being fueled by sentiment rather than service. "A Queen Consort deserves dignity," one op-ed read, "not erasure." But those voices were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of support for Catherine, whose appointment now seemed less like a promotion and more like a coronation in waiting. And as her popularity reached new heights, Camilla found herself cornered, stripped of narrative control, her past resurfacing like a wound that never truly healed. The monarchy wasn't just evolving, it was being recast. And in this new chapter, the nation had made clear who they believed belonged at the center. Back inside the palace, the consequences were rippling outward, and one event would turn this rivalry into an undeniable confrontation. They stood on the same stage but worlds apart. At a high-profile charity gala, Camilla and Catherine were placed side by side. What followed was a masterclass in royal restraint and unspoken tension. From the moment the cameras began flashing, the air was electric. The event, carefully scheduled weeks in advance, was meant to symbolize unity, an elegant affair championing a cause both women supported. But what unfolded before a room packed with dignitaries, press, and international observers was far from harmonious. Camilla entered first, flanked by longtime aides, her expression fixed in an unreadable calm. Moments later, Catherine appeared elegant, composed, and met with thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very walls of the historic venue. That sound, loud and unmistakable, echoed far beyond the room. Observers noted the subtle cues, the stiff posture, the studied avoidance of eye contact, and most telling of all, the lack of even a token exchange between the two women. What should have been a shared moment was instead a cold chess match played out in silence. When the speeches began, the tension only escalated. Camilla spoke first, choosing words that some insiders would later call pointed. She referenced years of dedication, earned respect, and the burden of responsibility, phrases that felt less like reflections and more like reminders. But it was Catherine's response, graceful, forward-looking, and deeply personal, that captured the room. She spoke of unity, service, and hope, never once addressing the growing narrative around her, but somehow managing to own it completely. William watched from the sidelines, his jaw tight, eyes darting between the two women. The tension wasn't imagined. Behind the scenes, palace staff scrambled to manage the media fallout. Leaks began emerging within hours. Reports of Camilla requesting a change in seating, of aides bickering over schedule control, of whispered complaints about Catherine stealing the spotlight. And yet, it was Catherine who walked away with headlines in her favor. International press praised her elegance and calm under pressure. Social media lit up with praise, comparing her composure to the great icons of royal history. Meanwhile, Camilla's performance was labelled awkward, tense, and in some corners, desperate. For an institution built on poise, even the hint of fracture was catastrophic. The charity gala had been intended as a show of royal solidarity. Instead, it confirmed what many had suspected: the divide was real, and it was now painfully public. And though the event ended with polite applause and rehearsed smiles, few believed the illusion anymore. The rivalry had stepped into the spotlight, and the world was watching. But behind the icy smiles and rehearsed remarks, something more dangerous was brewing. Camilla wasn't finished fighting. She didn't need to scream. She had the press. Suddenly, editorials emerged, questioning Catherine's readiness, praising Camilla's decades of quiet service, and rewriting the narrative one headline at a time. Within 48 hours of the charity gala, the tide shifted, but not naturally. Stories began circulating, not from random commentators, but from long-established royal correspondents and legacy publications. Phrases like still learning, unproven, and eager but untested were now being used to describe Catherine, terms rarely applied to a woman who had spent over a decade navigating the monarchy's most unforgiving expectations. In contrast, Camilla was being hailed as the pillar of discretion, a seasoned royal, and the backbone of a modernizing crown. The sudden praise felt manufactured. Royal insiders began whispering that a coordinated media campaign had been launched from behind palace walls. Old press relationships, long dormant, were allegedly being reactivated. Longtime friends of Camilla in the editorial world were placing flattering pieces, running favorable op-eds, and even encouraging comparisons meant to undermine Catherine's rising prominence. One leaked briefing even claimed Catherine had overstepped her brief, a thinly veiled jab meant to imply disobedience and ambition. For a monarchy rooted in tradition and loyalty, it was a loaded accusation. Behind the palace gates, staffers were reportedly rattled. The house was splitting in two. Those loyal to the Queen Consort felt emboldened by the shift in tone, while supporters of William and Catherine seethed in silence. Charles, caught in the middle, remained deliberately neutral. Refusing to publicly side with either woman, he chose to let the institution speak for itself, a decision that only deepened the silence and widened the divide. Behind closed doors, tensions escalated. Meetings became colder. Messages were routed through intermediaries. And in an unprecedented move, William began issuing quiet changes to protocol. Catherine's role in public engagements was subtly elevated, her introductions more elaborate, her presence more central. These weren't grand gestures, but calculated ones, unmistakably signalling his intention to secure her future place in the monarchy. And yet, the press war raged on. Camilla's narrative machine was relentless, and for a brief moment, it looked like she might regain control of the public story. Headlines leaned in her favor, and whispers of an internal correction plan gained traction. Because just when the media tide seemed to tilt her way, a single act by King Charles, deliberate and symbolic, broke through the noise and sent shockwaves through the palace corridors. But just as Camilla's strategy seemed to gain traction, a royal gesture from Charles shattered her momentum. In a rare speech, King Charles stunned the nation by calling Catherine the embodiment of future royal leadership. There was no mention of Camilla, none at all. The setting was regal, the audience expectant, but nothing could prepare them for what Charles chose to say. With composure, he praised the virtues of stability, compassion, and modern elegance, directly linking them to Catherine, now officially recognized as the driving force behind a new royal initiative. There was applause, yes, but also silence. The absence of Camilla's name, not even a passing nod to her efforts, was deafening. What was meant to be a ceremonial address swiftly became a royal declaration. The Queen Consort, long considered Charles's closest advisor, was nowhere in sight. Insiders confirmed she had not been invited. Some speculated it was to preserve peace. Others whispered it was a sign that Charles, after years of walking a tightrope between love and legacy, had chosen the crown's future over personal allegiance. The speech, though short, rippled far beyond the walls of the palace. Public opinion surged. Headlines across the UK framed the moment as a royal pivot, a symbolic coronation of Catherine's inevitable rise. Polls showed overwhelming support, especially among younger demographics, who saw in her not just grace, but strategy. Camilla, once secure in her station, found herself facing dwindling influence. Her name was quietly removed from several upcoming appearances. Speeches that once bore her signature were reassigned. Even loyal courtiers began reassessing their positions. It wasn't punishment, it was transition. And within the palace, aides described the atmosphere as quietly electric. The old order hadn't been dismantled with outrage. It had been outmaneuvered with dignity. The private corridors whispered the same truth. This was the moment the tide turned. Charles had said little, but what he didn't say had shaken the institution more than any argument ever could. Camilla, for all her connections and longevity, now faced a chilling reality: she was being slowly phased out. And no amount of press, posturing, or protest could undo what had just been made clear. But just when it seemed the palace had chosen its future, a voice from outside the gates would reignite the entire storm. Meghan Markle had been silent for months. But in a new interview, she dropped a single name with icy precision: Camilla. And suddenly, the Queen Consort was at the center of two wars at once. The moment Meghan uttered the name, the world froze. No elaboration, no accusations, just a pointed reference wrapped in loaded silence, and yet it was enough to detonate a royal tremor that shook both Windsor walls and the global press. Commentators erupted overnight. Analysts combed through every past scandal, every anonymous quote, every conveniently timed tabloid leak from the Sussex years. And with each replayed headline, a singular narrative began to resurface. The idea that Camilla, long seen as the cunning court strategist, had been the architect of more than just internal influence. She had, perhaps, been a player in the orchestration of reputation warfare. The whispers weren't new, but Meghan had reignited them with precision. The tension, once buried beneath layers of protocol and PR, erupted back into the public consciousness. Across the Atlantic, sources confirmed that William and Harry spoke briefly and pointedly, but not to mend fences. There was no warm, brotherly reconciliation. only a shared acknowledgement that the Queen Consort had, once again, become a flashpoint. And in the midst of it all stood Catherine, silent, composed, untouchable. Her silence was deafening, and yet it only fueled her rise in the public eye. While Camilla faced questions and speculation, Catherine appeared as the steady contrast, the woman who never fought for attention, yet somehow commanded it effortlessly. Behind the palace gates, aides scrambled. Within hours, a vague and carefully worded statement was issued, denying unfounded allegations and urging focus on unity. But unity had fractured long ago. What remained was a series of cold alliances and veiled tensions, too deep to repair and too dangerous to ignore. Camilla, once again cornered, was seen leaving a private charity event with her jaw clenched, her composure slipping in rare flashes of visible distress. Those who witnessed her departure described it in a single word: unraveled. This wasn't just a media moment, it was a reckoning. Meghan's silence had been her weapon. Her return, though brief, landed with devastating precision. Camilla was no longer merely battling shifting palace hierarchies or Catherine's growing acclaim. She was fighting ghosts from a war she thought was over and losing ground by the minute. As storm after storm battered the monarchy, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The crown was no longer shaped by bloodline alone, but by the people the world chose to follow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.